All right, so once again, welcome to School Site Council training, and this is Bonnie McFarland with our LCAP State and Federal Programs Unit, and joining me today are Rachel Garcia, Amy Tomamatsu, and Adrian Balcazar from our unit. This is training designed for training for trainers. So this is for those of you who are working with school site councils, have responsibility for supporting those councils and advisory committees, and for implementation and oversight of the school plan. So we've put this presentation in two parts this year because things seem to get longer and because our Zoom attention span is sometimes challenging. So we're going to have two parts. Today, we're going to focus on the role and responsibilities of school site councils, advisory committees, and tomorrow we'll be going more in depth into the school plan and school planning process. Today's presentation will be a little bit shorter. We plan to be finished by 4:30, and tomorrow we'll be going to 5 because it's a little bit more in depth. We are getting the presentation posted. Excuse us for the delay, but we will put a link in the chat as soon as that is up so you can go directly to the PowerPoint. And also, as always, the PowerPoint will be available in the slides, as well as a recording of the full presentation. So if you miss anything, want to hear it again or share it, it's available to you at the same link. So, as I mentioned, our topics for today are focused around school site councils and advisory committees. So we'll first look at the school site council, the role, responsibilities, and requirements associated with that council. Then we'll look at various advisory committees, and this has expanded over the years as and the committees have expanded. So we'll be looking at the English Learner Advisory Committee, the School Level Committee, the District English Learner Advisory Committee, and also we'll be looking at the role of the Parent Advisory Committee and EL Parent Advisory Committees that were required in conjunction with the local control and accountability plan. There's some significant overlap in those advisory committees, so we'll be looking at all of them. We'll also spend some time looking at procedures and bylaws, and also documentation that's required for compliance monitoring. We'll take a brief look at the school safety plan, and also we'll be looking at federal program monitoring in relation to school site council and school plan requirements. As always with our webinars, we ask you to put your questions in the chat, and we will monitor the questions. If we have time, we'll respond to them today, but we will collect them and send out a Q&A. And depending on the number of questions, we may be able to address some of them tomorrow at the beginning of our meeting. All right, so now I am going to turn it over to Rachel Garcia, and she's going to start us by looking at the role of the school site council. Rachel?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Bonnie mentioned, in this section, we're going to take a look at school site council requirements, including responsibilities, as well as composition and selection requirements. Next slide, please. The school site council is an elected group of school site representatives that includes parents, teachers, other school staff, and administration. At the secondary level, school site council also includes students. And the school site council is responsible for annually developing and updating the school plan for student achievement for programs funded through the consolidated application. Next slide, please. So in case you're not familiar with the consolidated application, also known as the CONAP, it's an agreement between the LEA and the California Department of Education for the distribution of categorical funds. And the CONAP has two parts: the spring submission, which is due each June, and the winter submission, which is due each February. Part 1 in the spring documents participation in federal grant programs for the coming year, and also provides assurances that the LEA will comply with the legal requirements for each program. And Part 2 in the winter contains LEA entitlements for each federally funded program. The school plan budget pages must also match the CONAP school site allocation pages in the winter CONAP submission. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the federal programs that are included and distributed through the CONAP. However, keep in mind your district or school may not participate in all of these federal programs. And most of what we will be referencing with regards to the school site council and the school plan has to do with the Title I program. Next slide, please. So currently there are no state programs funded through the CONAP. In the past, we had state programs that were funded through the CONAP, such as, and some of you may remember, EIA, SCE, and EIA LEP funding. Although there are no state programs currently funded through the CONAP, Assembly Bill 716 allows for the possibility of future state programs being funded through the CONAP. Next slide, please. Per education code, a school site council must be established if the school operates a program funded through the CONAP that requires a school plan for student achievement. So that would be for schools that receive Title I funds and operate a Title I school-wide program. The main responsibility of the school site council is developing the school plan for student achievement. And this includes annually reviewing and updating the contents of the plan, including proposed expenditures. It also includes approving and recommending the plan to the local governing board for approval, monitoring the implementation of the approved plan, and also annually evaluating the effectiveness of the plan and strategies in the plan. LEAs ensure in the CONAP that the school plan has been prepared in accordance with the law, and that school site councils have developed and approved a school plan for each school participating in programs funded through the CONAP. And also that SIPSAs were developed with the review, certification, and advice of the English Learner Advisory Committee, or Elac, if required. Additionally, the school site council is responsible for annually developing the comprehensive school safety plan, unless it's delegated to a school safety planning committee that meets specific ed code requirements. And we'll be taking a closer look at that a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So the composition requirements for school site council members are established in Education Code 65,000. The school site council in an elementary school shall be composed of two groups: school staff members and parent community members. There must be parity or equal numbers of members across the school staff members and parent community members groups. Here you can see that half of the school site council must be composed of school staff, which includes the principal or his or her designee, classroom teachers employed at the school, and other school personnel employed at the school who are not classroom teachers. The classroom teachers selected must also constitute the majority of the school staff members. Given that classroom teachers have to make up the majority of the staff members on the council, the minimum number of teachers required is 3. The other half of the school site council must be composed of parents of pupils attending the school or other members of the school community. And again, per education code, the number of parents and/or community members selected must equal the number of school staff members selected. So this means that the minimum number of school site council members at an elementary school is 10. And so again, that would include 1 principal or his or her designee, 1 other school personnel, 3 classroom teachers, and 5 parent and/or community members. Next slide, please. At the secondary level, the school site council must be composed of the school staff members group and the parent and/or community and student members group. The staff composition requirements for secondary schools are the same as the staff composition requirements for elementary schools. So again, the school staff members must include the principal or his or her designee, classroom teachers employed at the school, and other school personnel employed at the school who are, again, not teachers. And then classroom teachers selected must also constitute the majority of the school staff members group. The other half of the council composition at the secondary level includes parents of students attending the school or other members of the school community, and also includes students attending the school. And the minimum number of school site council members for secondary schools is also 10. Next slide, please. So keeping in mind the composition requirements that were shared for elementary and secondary schools on the previous slides, this chart displays a few options for school site council composition. So in the first column, you can see the minimum number of school site council members to meet the composition requirements is 10 at both the elementary and secondary level. The school site council can be larger as long as it meets the composition requirements, including parity or equal numbers of staff members and parent community members at the elementary level, and equal numbers of staff members and parent, community, and student members at the secondary level. So with a 12-member school site council, you can see in this chart that there must be 6 members on the school staff side and 6 members on the parent community side. Or if it's a secondary school, 6 members on the parent community student member side. Also in that scenario, you can see that there must be 4 classroom teachers to ensure classroom teachers make up the majority of the school staff side. Next slide, please. We sometimes get questions on who are considered classroom teachers or which staff are included in other school personnel. So classroom teachers are those who provide direct instruction for the full time of employment. So for example, you may have intervention teachers that provide direct instruction full time. They could be included as classroom teachers. Or you might have intervention teachers that provide direct instruction for part of the day and then support with professional development or PLCs during the other half of the day. So these teachers would be considered other school personnel because they don't provide direct instruction for the full time of employment. Other school personnel includes any employee at the school who is not a classroom teacher. So for example, assistant principals, counselors, clerical staff, custodians, yard supervisors, and instructional coaches, to name a few. There is also sometimes confusion that other school personnel only applies to classified staff. And this is not the case because certificated personnel who are not classroom teachers, such as counselors, may serve in the other school personnel category. And your board policy or bylaws should address this so that it's consistent throughout the district. Next slide, please. The principal or his or her designee is the only member of the school site council who is not elected. The principal or designee has voting rights on the school site council, however, may not veto any decision made by the council or make any changes to the approved school plan without the approval of the council. The role of the principal on the school site council is to set the vision and provide the school context, as well as provide information and resources to support the council with the development and implementation of the school plan. The principal should support the work of the council by leading from the side, while also ensuring that the decisions made by the council align with the school and the district's policies and vision. Next slide, please. Although Ed Code allows for a principal designee to serve on the school site council, it's recommended that the principal serve on the school site council. And some of the benefits to the principal serving on the council are that it sends the message that the work of the school site council and the development of the school plan are important, and also demonstrates the value of shared decision-making. The principal also plays an important role in ensuring alignment between the school and district's goals and priorities. It also provides the opportunity for the principal to build relationships with parents and the community. The principal also plays a key role in linking the strategies in the school plan to student learning, and also building this connection for school site council members. Next slide, please. So as previously mentioned, at the secondary level, students are required to serve on the parent community student group member side. The option to serve on the school site council must be open to any student enrolled in the school, meaning the school or district cannot set additional qualifications for membership. So for example, the school cannot say only students with a C or better average can serve on the school site council, or it cannot be a responsibility that is assigned to an ASB or student council member. Student members on the school site council must be elected by the entire student body, and the election must identify the responsibilities to serving on the school site council. Next slide, please. Parent members of the school site council includes all parents or guardians of students enrolled in the school. The only exception to this is that parents who are employed at the school may not serve on the parent group side, but they may serve on the staff side. If the parent is employed by the school district but does not work at the school site, then the parent may serve on the parent side. A community member is a member of the school community who is not employed by the school district and is not a parent or guardian of a student attending that school. This is something that should also be defined in school site council bylaws or district policy. It's also important to note that community members have to be elected by parents of students attending the school, and therefore community members cannot vote for school site council candidates. Next slide, please. Per education code, school site council members must be selected by their peers. This means that classroom teachers must be selected by classroom teachers. Other school personnel who are not classroom teachers must be selected by other school personnel who are not classroom teachers. And parents and community members must be selected by parents of students attending the school. And at the secondary level, students attending the school must be selected by students attending the school. Since members must be selected by their peers, no seat on the school site council may be reserved for any group or individual. Education code does not specify how members are selected by their peers, so this can be done through a ballot process or an open meeting vote, and individuals may also self-nominate. For student members at the secondary level, a separate election must be held in which the entire student body has the opportunity to select student members. An education code does not specify how many students must be on school site council, so this should also be defined in your bylaws. And as a reminder, parent members may not be employees at the school. So while a parent who teaches at their child's school cannot be selected to represent the parent side of the school site council, they could be selected to represent the staff side as a teacher. Some schools also elect non-voting alternate members who are seated as voting members in the event of a midterm vacancy. It's important to note that alternate members are not official members and would not be included on your school site council roster or membership list unless there is a vacancy that they fill. And this is to ensure continuity and avoids having to hold an election mid-year to fill the vacancy. And again, this is also something that should be addressed in your bylaws or district policy. Next slide, please. So I've noted a number of instances that should be addressed in your bylaws or district policy. And here are just a few other examples of things related to the selection of school site council members that you may want to consider addressing in your board policy or school site council bylaws. So what is the process that will be used to select school site council members and officers? How long will school site council members and officers serve? So for example, is it a 2-year term for members and a 1-year term for officers? What is the process for providing notice of elections for each of the required groups? What are the responsibilities of the council? What are the responsibilities of officers? Another consideration is a policy of non-discrimination. While it is not required, it's suggested that board policy or school site council bylaws address these issues as questions come up about these things all the time. And so we'll be taking a closer look at bylaws later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Education Code 65001 allows for some school site council exceptions for small schools. And these exceptions previously required waivers from the state board, but no longer require waivers per Assembly Bill 716. So the first exception is that schools with the common site administrator may operate a shared school site council if the school has less than 300 students. The second exception is that up to 3 schools with the combined population of less than 1,000 students may operate a shared school site council if the schools have a shared campus or if the schools have geographic proximity to one another and similar student populations. It's important to note that with both of these exceptions, shared school site councils must still meet the composition requirements that were explained previously and specified in Education Code 65,000. Next slide, please. Another exception is that schools with fewer than 300 students may operate a school site council that has all of the following representatives: 1 principal, 1 teacher selected by teachers, 1 other school personnel selected by other school personnel, and 3 parents or community members selected by parents at the elementary level. Or if a secondary school, then 2 parents or community members selected by parents, and 1 student selected by students. For this exception to occur, it requires approval from the local governing board and the local bargaining unit. Additionally, a school district governing board or county board of education may request on behalf of a school site council that the state board grant a waiver of any provision related to school site councils. Next slide, please. Training for school site council members is necessary to ensure that members understand their roles and responsibilities. This training needs to ensure the members understand their legal obligations and the requirements outlined in Education Code for school site councils. Members need training on the Green Act requirements to ensure that the council follows the requirements for holding public school site council meetings and conducting business at these meetings. Other possible training topics include trainings on bylaws and meeting procedures, training on the Title I program and requirements, the purpose and use of state and federal program funds, how to analyze student achievement data, evidence-based instructional practices, and monitoring implementation, as well as evaluating the effectiveness of the school plan, and strategies. The training topics really depend on what the needs of the school site council are in order to help them fulfill their legal responsibilities. So there may be other training topics that are not listed. And that concludes my section. So I will now turn it over to Amy.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to be covering a couple other advisory committees. And so we're going to move on to the next slide and start with the Elac, the English Learner Advisory Committee. Per the Education Code 52176B, an Elac must be established if a school has 21 or more English learners. Elac responsibilities include advising the SSC, which Rachel just finished talking about, and they would advise the SSC on programs and services for English learners for inclusion in the School Plan for Single Achievement, or SIPSA, assist in the development of the school-wide needs assessment, discuss efforts to make parents aware of the importance of attendance, and the Elac must have an opportunity to elect at least one member to the district level District English Learner Advisory Committee, also known as DLAC. Next slide, please. The only selection requirement for Elac is that Elac parent members must be elected by the parents or guardians of English learners at the school. So in terms of composition requirements, the parents or guardians of English learners must constitute the same percentage of Elac membership as the percentage of English learners in the school. So what that means, in other words, is that if, let's say, 60% of the students in the school are English learners, then at least 60% of the parents or guardians on that committee must be a parent or guardian of English learners. Parents or guardians, this sometimes is a question that gets asked, parents or guardians of EOs, English only students, or of reclassified students, also known as RFEPs, may serve on the Elac as long as the percentage requirement is met in terms of parents of English learners. But they're not considered English learner parents. The next slide, please. Elac members must receive training materials and training to assist them in carrying out their required advisory responsibilities. Training must be planned in full consultation with those committee members, which means that you should get input from the Elac as to what training they need to be able to fulfill their responsibilities. They need to be trained on those roles and responsibilities, and they should also receive training on the Green Act requirements, bylaws, and meeting procedures to ensure that members know how to conduct an effective meeting. It's also important to consider what the Elac needs to know to be able to advise on programs and services for English learners in the school plan, and what they need to know to be able to assist in the needs assessment. So again, training has to be planned in full consultation with the members, so it's important to work with the committee to determine what their needs are. On the next slide, there's going to be specific steps that must be taken if the Elac were to delegate its responsibilities to another committee, such as the school site council. So there is that option, but we want to make sure that there's an awareness of the steps to be able to make that happen. So first, an Elac has to be elected and informed of its responsibilities. So even if there is a plan or an idea to delegate the responsibilities of Elac to SSC, there still needs to be an election of the Elac, and that Elac must be fully constituted and informed of what its responsibilities are as a committee. Then, once they're informed, that Elac would then vote to delegate its responsibilities to SSC for a period of up to 2 years. Then the SSC would need to be informed of the Elac's responsibilities and vote on whether or not they would accept those responsibilities. If the SSC accepts the Elac responsibilities, then the SSC would be responsible for fulfilling the legal requirements of both the SSC and the Elac. Then after the specified period of time is up, which would not exceed 2 years, that an Elac must be elected again. So it would kind of start all over. Next slide. So the ELAC is a site level committee looking at English learner services. There is also a district level committee called the DLAC. The DLAC is required when a school district has more than 50 English learners. So again, at the school site level, it's based on 21, and then DLAC is if a district with 51 or more English learners. Each school would have a school level ELAC, and then the DLAC is comprised of members of school level ELAC members who've been elected to serve on the DLAC. Next slide. The DLAC also has specific advisory responsibilities to advise the local governing board on the tasks here on the screen. You see this bulleted list. And the tasks and responsibilities that the DLAC has would also inform the training that the DLAC needs to be able to fulfill the responsibility. So it's important to note these. Some of the topics are pretty similar to the responsibilities seen in school level ELACs, but instead it's at the district level, such as reviewing the goals and objectives, the plan for programs and services at the district level for English learners, the district EL master plan, the district level needs assessment, etc. Also, if the DLAC is going to be serving as the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee for purposes of the LCAP development process, then the committee must carry out responsibilities of both committees. And we'll be looking at what the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee is in a couple slides, so we'll review that again. Next slide. So here we have the DLAC training, similar to what Rachel talked about with SSC and what I mentioned in terms of ELAC. This DLAC training topic should be provided in consultation with DLAC members, but also knowing what the roles and responsibilities of the DLAC committee are. There's going to be certain types of information we want to provide and training that we want to provide so that they could fulfill those responsibilities. So examples of training topics included here, their roles and responsibilities, again, the Green Act, bylaw, meeting procedures, and then topics related to the responsibilities they have for advising the governing board, the district level needs assessment, English learner program options and services, the EL roadmap policy, reclassification, and if they're going to also be serving as the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, they may want to understand the LCAP process. If not, they still may want to understand the LCAP process as it is a part of the district's plan for serving students. And then the next slide. So the LCAP Advisory Committee, in terms of the development of the LCAP, there are two required advisory committees that EdCode requires for LEAs to present as part of their process. And the first one is the Parent Advisory Committee, which must include parents of students who are English learner, foster youth, and low income. Every LEA developing an LCAP will need to convene this Parent Advisory Committee, sometimes referred to as the PAC. And then the other committee related to the LCAP development process is the English Learner Parent Advisory Committee, or sometimes referred to as the LPAC, but not to be confused by the assessment for English learners. But this is for LEAs that have at least 15% ELs and at least 50 pupils who are ELs. And so if you meet that, if you fall within an LEA that has 15% ELs and at least 50 pupils, you must additionally convene and present the LCAP to an English Learner Parent Advisory Committee. There is no, in EdCode, it specifies that there's no requirement to establish a separate and new parent committee for this purpose of the EL Parent Advisory Committee. And we do find that many districts will use their DLAC to fulfill this responsibility. So again, in doing so, this means the DLAC must meet the responsibilities of both the DLAC as in specified and also the LCAP. It is very clear though that within an LEA, The PAC and the ELPAC are two separate committees. And that ends, I guess my section is pretty short. And so we are moving on to the next section, procedures, bylaws, and documentation. And I will turn it over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. So you've heard references throughout as we've been talking about district policies and procedures and about bylaws. So we're going to take a brief look at those right now, and then also spend a little bit of time looking at documentation that's needed for school site councils. So as you can see, number one, bylaws are not required by law, but they are important for a functioning committee. Many of the questions that we get throughout the year or about disputes that come up perhaps on councils, questions that arise, and we'll always ask, well, what's the requirement and how do I know what to do here? And the answer we often have to give back is, well, what do your bylaws say? Because when you'll find that many of the issues that come up just aren't addressed in law. The law is relatively short on school site councils, so you really need bylaws to address things that might come up proactively. There's some basic things that should be included in bylaws, and you saw a list of some of those in Rachel's slide, but how vacancies are filled, what duties, what about officers? Are you going to have them? What are their roles? And others that were on that list. So there's some sort of general things that need to be included in bylaws as to how the council will function. But then there are others that come up that often you'll find your bylaws sort of get changed and morph over the years because they respond to issues that have come up. Like, we never thought that would be a problem. Now we need to figure out how to address it. What about board member, a school site council member who then runs for a board? Is that a conflict of interest or not? Have you defined that? So again, here's just a few of the kinds of things that you might include. Processes for unexpected vacancies, as Rachel mentioned. And what about members that don't attend the meetings? Do you have something in your bylaws about that? What about addressing disputes or disagreements? Processes for voting on actions? All of those things need to be defined somewhere. They can be defined in district policies or procedures. There may be some things that you want consistency across your schools in, and that may be a district policy or procedures. Others might be in school level bylaws. Some districts provide schools a template to use for their bylaws that they can adjust and that have some of these basic things included. But just know bylaws are a good proactive way to avoid problems and disputes moving forward, and things that aren't answered in law, because many things aren't answered in the law. All right. So in addition to bylaws, we have, and this is something else you've been hearing throughout the presentation, reference to the Green Act. And the Green Act is actually a section of education code, as you can see there. It's named after legislator Leroy Green. So got his name on the act. So everyone calls it the Green Act. But if you want to find it, you have to go to Education Code 35147. Some of the procedures that must be followed are included in this section of Education Code. The Green Act applies to advisory committees, councils, and those kinds of groups, as opposed to the Brown Act, which is more stringent and applies to school boards and public or groups like that. So this is not as stringent as the Brown Act, and councils and advisory committees follow the Green Act, not the Brown Act. That's often confused. There's some similarities, but again, you can see fairly short and fairly simple. Meetings have to be open to the public. The public has to have an opportunity to address council. And the posting requirement, that's where this meeting notice comes from, is in this section of Education Code. What needs to be included in the notice is also specified here. And also the Green Act requires that council action be limited to what's posted on the agenda. So if it's not on the agenda, the council can't take action. However, questions or information that aren't on the agenda can be considered, but they can't take action. Violations of the Green Act may require that the item be reconsidered at another meeting after they've had public input. And Green Act also requires that any materials that are provided to the council should be made available to any member of the public who requests it. So basically, those are the ground rules under which the school site council operates. So you can see there are a lot of things not addressed here that you need to address in policy or in bylaws. So another thing that we'll look at are other agreements that need to be in place, and under rules of order, that to be effective, a council needs to know how they're going to conduct business. What are the rules they're going to follow? How do we proceed? A lot of councils follow Robert's Rules of Order or some variation of that. Sometimes people have taken Robert's rules and sort of parsed them down to make them easier to deal with. The rules of order should support the work of the council, and therefore they need to be clear and not overly burdensome, but council needs to understand what are the rules of the game, how do we operate here. It may also include things like a code of ethics. That might be in your bylaws somewhere. You may include that, or you may want to include that as a separate agreement on how council members behave if those happen to come up as issues. Also, it's recommended that councils periodically evaluate their work. How are we functioning? And take some time to reflect. And that reflection sometimes results in revisions to bylaws because you realize there's something we could put in place that would help us function better. So this is all about helping the council work well together to do the work of the school. All right, so let's take a look at documentation. Documentation is critical and often is a place where districts get in trouble if they haven't done a good job, if schools haven't done a good job of documenting the school site council actions and procedures. It is a part of compliance monitoring, and it needs to be maintained and it needs to accurately reflect school site council actions. So how the school site council how do you annually evaluate the plan? Where's that documented that the school site council annually evaluated the school plan? How does the school site council obtain input from the Elac? You heard earlier that's a requirement. That needs to be documented. It should be on the agenda of both the Elac and the school site council, and it should be recorded in minutes that there was conversation. Otherwise, you have no evidence of Elac input into the plan. So those are just a couple of examples of the kinds of things that need to be included in minutes and in agenda. And so another area is elections. How are your elections? How did that process take place? What were the results of election? How was that done? That should be written down somewhere. So if anyone disputes an election, you have a documented record of it. Take a look at more specifically at agendas and minutes on the next slide. Okay, you'll see later that some of the evidence that we're going to talk about, some of this documentation serves as evidence for FPM. And in many places, you'll see the evidence requests in the FPM item directly go to the minutes. And one of the problems that districts often run into with FPM is when they provide the monitor with the documentation, the minutes don't respond to the question in the FPM instrument. So it's important that you have the right minutes for the issue that's being addressed in FPM. But it's important to think about who's monitoring that at the district level. So someone should be monitoring what's going on at school sites and periodically checking in to see how are those minutes? Do they look like they're capturing what's in the meeting? Are they clear? And are they something that you'd feel comfortable giving to an FPM reviewer? Templates can help ensure that required topics are covered. So you may have a template that kind of lists things. Some districts have topics that have to be addressed within the agenda. So they'll put that in and give them to people. So when they put out their agendas or write their minutes, they're taking notes on the right thing. You need to think about who's going to be taking the minutes. So that goes back to officers. Do you have a secretary? Is that person elected? Do you have another person taking notes? Considering how important those minutes are and how they're used for compliance purposes, you want to think about that. What kind of training is the person getting who's taking the minutes? Is someone supporting them and giving them an understanding of what they need to include, what's important as they take minutes throughout the meeting? The agendas and the minutes should be aligned, as you saw in the Green Act. You can't act on something if it's not on the agenda, so they should be aligned so that you're following, the minutes follow the agenda. And the minutes need to reflect key decisions that are being made. So if you're making decisions about Elac input, about inclusion of things in the school plan, that should be indicated in the minutes, and that it was discussed, it was voted upon, and what the result of the vote was. And the minutes should reflect the voice of either the council or the Elac or whatever group. It should accurately reflect what went on with those people in those meetings. You also want to make sure you have a system for, as we said, periodically reviewing the minutes, but also maintaining documentation in a place where you can easily access it. You don't want to be having to go search around and where are the minutes and where are the agendas. So you need some sort of centralized process for ensuring those minutes are uploaded and that they're accessible when you need them. All right, so what should the minutes contain? Here's a list of the things, and this is again where a template can come in handy. The minutes need to include the date, the place, the time of the meeting. They need to show a roster who was attending the meeting, any who were officers that might be there, any actions that were taken. If there's pertinent action and decisions are made, that needs to be recorded, any pertinent information that's shared. All motions, even if the motion is rejected. So someone makes a motion, what was the motion? Was it adopted? Was it rejected? The name of the person who made the motion, the name of the person who seconded the motion, points of order and appeals, whether sustained or lost. So somebody says, I don't think that's the correct way to proceed, or someone has a point of order, they disagree, that should be, and maybe the group doesn't sustain that, but whether or not it is, it needs to be noted in the minutes. Elections, also, we said you should have a record of elections. Names of nominees, election results should also be recorded. And that would include election of officers within the school site council meetings. The name of the secretary or a recorder, if you have a recorder rather than a secretary who's submitting the minutes. And then they need to, the school site council, the Elac, the group needs to approve the minutes or approve them with revisions. And then they need to be kept on file for reference. Okay. So processes in place for your for documentation, someone at the district watching over it to make sure that what's being recorded is accurate and is the kind of thing that you're going to need. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rachel to talk about the school safety plan.
Thank you, Bonnie. So as Bonnie mentioned, we're going to take a look at the comprehensive school safety plan. Next slide, please. So the requirements for the comprehensive school safety plan are specified in Education Code 32280 through 32289. And some of the key requirements include that all school staff must be trained on the components of the school safety plan, and also that the plan must be written and developed by the school site council. Now, the school site council has the option to delegate this responsibility to a safety planning committee if the committee meets composition requirements that are specified in Education Code. And so these composition requirements include the principal or his or her designee, one teacher who is a representative of the certificated employee organization, one parent whose child attends the school, one classified employee who is a representative of the classified employee organization, and other members may be included on the safety planning committee. Another important requirement is that during the writing and development of the plan, the school site council or the safety planning committee must consult with a representative from a law enforcement agency, a fire department, and other first responder entities. And additionally, any updates to the plan must be shared with each of these entities. And so the requirement to consult with the fire department and other first responder entities, in addition to the law enforcement agencies, this became effective January 1st, 2019 through Assembly Bill 1747. Next slide, please. So the contents of the Comprehensive School Safety Plan are also outlined in the Education Code. And there are many required components that must be included in the plan, as well as some components that are encouraged under Education Code. Everything that's listed here on this slide falls under the required components. And so it's important for LEAs and schools to become familiar with all of the sections of Education Code related to the Comprehensive School Safety Plan, because there are so many components that must be included in the plans. And so I'm not going to read through the whole list, but just to go through a few of them. The plan must include an assessment of the current status of school crime committed on campus and at any school-related functions. This may include a review of data such as office referrals, suspension or expulsion data, attendance rates, or SARB data. The safety plan must also include strategies and programs that provide and maintain a high level of safety, as well as address the school's procedures for complying with current safety laws, including child abuse reporting procedures, disaster procedures, suspension and expulsion policies and procedures to notify teachers of dangerous pupils. But again, there's a long list of requirements that must be included, so it's important to be familiar with all of the components. Next slide, please. So schools must update and adopt the plan by March 1st of every year. And the school site council or safety planning committee must also present the plan at a public meeting at the school site prior to the adoption of the plan to allow for public opinion regarding the plan. There are also specific notification requirements in Ed Code that specify that the school site council or safety planning committee must notify in writing the persons and entities listed on the slide, if available, of the public meeting. The school safety plan must also be submitted to the school district for approval. And so there is no specific deadline in statute for the school district to approve the plan. However, the California Department of Education recommends that plans be approved within a month of school approval or as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So the CDE created a comprehensive school safety plan tool to assist schools in developing and updating their school safety plans. And here you can see a screenshot of the first 2 pages of the CDE's tool. And at the bottom of the slide, we've also provided a link to the document. And so this checklist tool includes the school safety plan requirements, as well as some suggestions and resources for some components of the plan. And so now I will turn it over to Adrian.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, FPM. So can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So with FPM, we know that all of the people that receive, all the school districts that receive the Title I and any other federal money are have to be part of the FPM. And so federal and state law require that the CDE is that monitoring agency that will make sure and oversee that the implementation of your categorical programs that are being operated by the LEA, by you, that you are minimally fulfilling the minimum requirement fiscally and programmatically. And so this is done to make sure that the LEAs are spending the necessary funds in the right way that is required by law. And so the FPM process is kind of a three-part. So part one refers to the specific evidence that's being required from the requested through each of the program instruments. And I'll go over that in just a minute. But basically, the districts are kind of divided into cohorts, and there is a process of online and on-site. So when you are selected for all reviews, you will have, you'll either fall into an online or an on-site process. And so, but all of the evidence that is being required through the CMT, which is the California monitoring tool, all districts, whether you're selected for online or on-site, will be uploaded to the CMT system and reviewed that way. Part two applies to school districts that have been selected for on-site review. And this would include classroom observations of any of the programs that you are implementing through, say, the Title I program or any other program that you have happening there with federal money. Part three would include, for the on-site reviews as well, it would include interviews with the administrators and any staff that's paid with Title I. It would interview staff paraprofessionals and any particular, possibly students as well. So as I mentioned, the way the FPM is organized is because there are so many LEAs that receive federal money, the state of California has divided all of the LEAs and the charter schools into 4 cohorts. And so that has grown as charters have been added to this. The cohorts have increased and have gotten larger. So all of the districts have been categorized into either A, B, C, or D cohort. And from there, we have the every year is, oh, I think somebody has their unmute. Okay, thank you. So as you can see for the 2021 year, this right here, this second column, right now we have cohort A that was selected. Some districts were selected for online review, and also cohort C, which is for on-site. But due to the pandemic, they were all conducted through a telemonitoring vehicle of using Zoom for interviews and such. So moving forward to next school year for the 21-22, the districts have been selected for whether if you are in cohort B or D, those have been selected and they are posted on the CDE website. In looking at what is being asked, what evidence, you can find that in the instrument. So we have the compensatory education instrument, which we call CE, and also the English Learner Program instrument, and that we call that the EL instrument. There are also about 17 or 16 other instruments, depending on if other programs are being reviewed during an FPM. But for today's purpose, we're looking at specifically the compensatory education and the English Learner Program instrument, because both of these pertain to school site council and advisory committees. So in reflecting on last year's FPM reviews, there were 116 reviews that took place last year. And for the compensatory education, the CE program, there was the top 5 of the Title I findings of noncompliance. And so as we see, CE2, which is School Parent and Family Engagement Policy, CE5, the SSC composition, and down at the bottom, CE18, the School Site Council evaluates the SPSA services. So 3 out of the 5 of the top 5 non-compliant items for last year, the 1920 school year, were found typically out of compliance. So that involves, you know, your school site council and your school plan development. So if we take a closer look at CE2, the school parent and family engagement policy, this is looking at the evidence that was being requested was looking at your school parent and family engagement policy, looking at the school parent compact, uploading documentation regarding your parent committee meeting agendas, minutes, and sign-in sheets. Also records of activities for building the capacity of your families as well as your staff, and the annual distribution of the policy, including the school parent compact. So it's kind of the development and then the distribution of it. And that's all that's the evidence that's being required of CE2. So here is some reasons why it became one in the top 5 of why districts were found non-compliant. So one might be that the elements that were required for the policy and or the school parent compact were not inclusive of all those components that are legally required. So they didn't address all of those elements. Another reason was that schools are identified, or districts are identified, is because there's no evidence showing that the parents were part of that joint development of either the policy or the compact. And then lastly, what's common is that there's no evidence showing how these 2 items were distributed to the parents of the Title I students. So again, these are things for you to reflect on and see, you know, what's the process, what are the protocols and the policies that we have in place for our parent and family engagement policy, as well as our school parent compact. The next item that's the top 5 is CE5, which is the school site council composition. And Rachel went over that in depth. So we see that what's required is the records of the school site council peer selections, the roster that has the membership categories, and then also a copy of the school plan. And also to always note, when you have students, especially in the secondary school site council composition, when you have students, you must always redact the name uploading, because in the CMT that becomes public. So, excuse me, that also you have to, you know, be aware that you have to redact those student names. So what the CDE FPM reviews look at, they actually get this table and they look at, for all of the specific peer groups, they are looking for the classroom teachers, other personnel, the parent and family community members, and students as applicable in the secondary level. And so they look for the nomination forms and the notices, and they'll check it off for each of those groups. They'll look at ballots with names of nominated candidates. They'll look at ballots that have the tallies of votes, and also meeting minutes and online voting records, especially during the pandemic. So it's very important that you have the records of peer selection for each of those various groups that are part of your school site council. Some pitfalls that happened in CE5 that the FPM reviewers have noted is, again, parent members, and noting, as in the earlier description, about who is parents, and also parity. What is parity, and is there parity? And then to always make sure that the teacher section, that group is the majority of your school site council. So some questions to ponder is, what can you do? And then in reflecting in that, you need to know, what does ESSA say? And then backed up by, what do your bylaws say? So you also want to make sure that your policies, procedures is all in alignment to your what ESSA says, in your bylaws. So it's important to avoid these pitfalls by following all of that. Also, with school site council composition, some of the reasons why the particular schools were found non-compliant was because members they were not selected by a peer group, or there was no evidence of election procedures, or that the election procedures were not followed. There was also seats that were reserved for individuals, such as was mentioned before, if there was documentation showing that it had to be a GPA, that would be not allowable. So if there's any documentation that has that you would be found non-compliant. And also that there was no written process for replacing members that were unable to fulfill their term. So that's why, again, as Bonnie mentioned, the bylaws are really important because they really show, the system and how it works. And then also too, if you have parents that were employed at the school site and they were serving, the SSC as an SSC member representing the parents, again, they're an employee of the school and not of the parent group. So these are some common non-compliant items. And then the last of the three that are in the top five is the CE18, which is the school site council has the responsibility of evaluating the services that have been identified in the school plan. And so the evidence requested is for school-wide programs is the school plan itself. Also the school site, the SSC reviews the school plan. So there must be evidence for that. And also how the SSC evaluates and shows evidence of that evaluation in the school plan. And if you have a school plan or a targeted assistance plan, there are specific program modifications that are based on the evaluation. So if you have a particular school that maybe is not running it school-wide, but also that is a targeted assistance, there is that evidence that has to be collected under CE18 for that school, showing specific program modifications based on the evaluation results. Some pitfalls that CDE has pointed out is in the analysis. So how is your analysis? How is that included in your process? What do you have as what training have you had as far as for the teachers and all your members of school site council and your parents? What does that analysis look like? Also, the SSC's involvement in reflecting on all of the monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of your actions that are in your school plans. So you want to make sure that you have that included as part of your cycle of developing your school plan and the revising of it. So when you are creating or reflecting on your evaluation process, you want to make sure that you have answered these questions to yourself so that you can make sure that all your stakeholders, all your SSC members, they all understand what points of data you're gathering, or how faithful are you to, how faithful was the implementation of that particular service or program? What does the analysis of the data look like? How effective was the whole plan in entirety, as well as specific sections? And so how would you guide the SSC in making changes to a specific activity that you either, is not effective or can become more effective? So again, these are all questions to keep in mind as you develop and address this part of your process of evaluating the services of your plan. So some typical non-compliant items in this for CE18 is that the school site council members, when they were interviewed, they stated that they were asked to approve a completed plan without being involved. Also, school site council members were not familiar with the budget and that fiscal side of the planned activities. The minutes did not reflect any time that the school spent on developing the school plan. And also the minutes did not reflect any adequate training for the school site council members, in the roles and responsibilities, as well as in that analysis process. And then also too, finding in this CE18 might come from a lack of documentation of input from the advisory committee. So if there is nothing formalized about the Elac and any other advisory committee that is giving input, this could be a finding in CE8 during an FPM review. So it's important that we understand all of the legal requirements, that we have the policies and procedures in place, and that there is oversight from the district level to monitor and make sure that all of these pieces that today we have covered, that they're in place and that they're being monitored and evaluated for the effectiveness. And so that concludes today. We did, it's a little bit shorter today, but we guarantee tomorrow will be a little bit longer. We do want to remind you that tomorrow is part 2. It is at 3 o'clock. And these are the topics we are going to be covering. It's the school plan for student achievement. We're going to specifically look at that. We're going to look at the school plan, the school-wide program, the comprehensive needs assessment, the evidence-based interventions, resource inequities, steps to developing the school plan, and also looking at school plans in relation to the CSI, TSI, and ATSI. And then that alignment between the LCAP, the school plans, and how everything needs to work together. And so with that, I would like to welcome you to use the chat to place any questions that you might have. We will look at them, and if we can possibly answer some of them at the beginning tomorrow, we will, but we will definitely respond to them in writing through our Q&A, and we will be sending that out to everyone. And we want to thank you for joining us today. We hope this has been helpful, and that we welcome your questions in the chat. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.